Riley, you were very evasive about this, but what do you guys think? I think Riley would do fairly well in a Mark Ruffalo lookalike contest.
I get this. This is not the first time this has been proposed to me.
Yeah, plausible, you know.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's you need that post-stroke like facial paralysis, and you need that puckered like Ruffalo kissy face.
Are you suggesting that if you have a stroke, you either go Ruffalo or Chrétien?
My man's gone full
You're
Ruffalo.
either Gary Busey or you're Ruffalo. Yeah, I think
the Ruffalo Chrétien scale.
Yeah.
Something the doctors use. It's very funny to like go on a podcast and be like, "Have you considered having a stroke?" You know, they didn't let me back on Shalpo after that.
So I think, number one, there's a lot to hate in the budget that Rachel Reeves presented last week. Well, earlier this week at time of recording. But you can't fault the fact that what she has done is dropped a fucking daisy cutter on the Royal Agricultural College.
900% luxury tax on salmon trousers.
Cirencester will never look the same. Tattered bits of gilets being found all over the Worcestershire.
Like, it's the combination of the gigantic middle fingers to people dodging taxes by like putting all of their money into agricultural property,
or as you might more curtly call them, farmers.
Yeah, and also taxing small private schools that are not particularly prestigious. Absolute nuclear weapon dropped on Cirencester. Cannot fault it.
Oh.
Hello, everybody. It is TF. It is me, Riley. I'm here with November and Milo. Hussein is now officially on paternity leave.
He's gone off to start his new farm business.
Yeah.
Bad news for the Kasvani household.
After becoming an oil warehouse and a SPAC, we have now also become a farm. And Trash Future Farm will, Clarkson could do it. We're going to do it. And we're going to be fully inheritable by our descendants.
Farm cum minor public school. That's our business.
I feel like Jeremy Clarkson is going to start a kind of in fact, the National Union of Farmers did say that farmers are going to get militant about the fact that their passing on agricultural land through inheritance is now just going to be taxed as normal. So I do think that what's going to happen is Jeremy Clarkson is finally going to build an onboard technical.
No, they're just going to do the European thing of like firing manure at Downing Street, and Starmer is going to have to stand within the kind of rain of manure and be like, I respect you for all you do growing like, wheat or whatever.
That's right. Before we go on, I also want to welcome our guest. We are here with the former guest of this show and host of the newly revamped Eurotrash podcast. It is Dominik Leusder. Dominik, how you doing?
Hey, good to be back.
We are, of course, going to be talking about the budget.
And how's that farm that you run?
Yeah. Now that you're within 7 years of dying, how do you like being a farmer?
Just the whole like way that inheritance tax works, where it's like within 7 years previous to your death, has set a load of farmers into a kind of B-tier Liam Neeson movie now.
Yeah, well, it's either they have to die now or stay alive 7 years. There's no other option.
Just I was sort of like a weird wrinkle in the Speed franchise,
I've picked up a very particular set of skills.
Farming.
Skills that make me a nightmare for people like you. Combine harvesting, hay baling.
James Dyson is, of course, furious at these taxes, which again is
renowned farmer.
Yeah, well, he is a renowned farmer because he is trying to pass £77 million worth of agricultural land to his children, and he owns like £500 million worth of farmland, largely because of this tax loophole.
Yeah, it's like a tax, whatever the legal one is, a tax avoidance device, right?
Yeah.
There was no inheritance tax on agricultural land, which was insane. This is something that like Rachel Reeves has now closed in order to fuck with James Dyson specifically.
Very amusing.
Well, he really needed the Reform Party to get in and bring in some rule where there was no inheritance tax on teabaggable hand dryers. In that case, he would have been sitting pretty, but unfortunately,
that's a kind of like antisocial behavior for which the ASBO has not been invented, to like recirculate your own testicles through an entire bathroom.
Yeah. I think the Reform Party, while trying to get James Dyson's vote, is going to scrap inheritance taxes on, as you say, teabaggable hand dryers. Well, similarly.
The quote, as you say, teabaggable hand dryers, is so perfect.
While simultaneously, allowing landowners to inherit workers as well.
Yeah.
We're going to tie people to the land again.
We're going to go feudal Russia. That'll be fun.
That's right. But we have Dom on to talk a little bit more about the budget in detail. What's in, what's out, what does it actually mean? And of course, how does it compare to the US? Both of which really are examples of trying to fix a creaking and nearly, I would say, destroyed neoliberalism, with the US willing to do it. Again, not a good thing, but they are at least doing the thing, and us making sort of some gestures at trying to do it and then falling flat on our faces. I mean, that's how I see it. Dom, what's your headline take?
Yeah, I mean, you're putting me in the really uncomfortable situation of having to defend like U.S. macro policy. Then again, I mean, the point of comparison is the UK, and it doesn't really get much worse than that in the European context. Both countries, sort of smoldering neoliberal, bombed out wreckage and sort of broken social contracts. Unlike the UK, though, the US has generally a high investment, high productivity economy. So there's that. The US, in many ways, the UK is in a worse position. But standards of living are still higher, or rather more equal, and there's less. There are fewer Gary Indianas in the UK, and you don't quite have that sort of Rust Belt type deprivation. But you also don't have the firepower, right? You don't have. I mean, the reason why this budget confused so many people, and my heart goes out to all my friends in the journalistic profession. Very few of them, I should say, but those who I do consider friends have to deal with this bullshit on a detailed level. They have to crack their heads about the weird little accounting tricks that the UK seems to think it has to do to actually get any money out, sort of to lubricate the juices of this economy. Whereas the US, in a way, because of its even more extreme neoliberalism, and because the labor market situation was so extreme in the aftermath of the pandemic, where we've forgotten this, but there was a moment where people genuinely feared some form of social collapse, with unemployment creaking up to 20% again, sort of almost back to Great Depression level.
The cool zone, I remember that, yeah.
That forces the hand of policymakers. Suddenly, the congressional arithmetic has to work out, because otherwise you have a big fucking problem. And so then you get this consensus behind, very aggressive spending. A lot of it goes to corporations, and but you also get these direct transfers to household, and you get this big fiscal push, right? So the reason things have been going well on the surface, at least, is there was a lot of money, and basic arithmetic means the denominator is going to grow a bit, and there's more pressure in the economy, in other words. And because the labor markets are so weak, there aren't the protections that you have here. There's a lot of churn, right? People are out of a job, but then they get into a job, and they get in with a bit more leverage and their reservation wages, so their demands are higher, and they can then suddenly bargain for higher wages, and then you get this wage spurt. All of that you don't have here, and you don't have the spending power. At least that's what they tell themselves. So in that sense, yes, the US did better, but it did better for the reasons of having less social democracy and fewer labor market protections. Now we can get into whether or not the UK can go on a big spending spree on its own, and whether it really had to do this accounting trickery. But I think the similarity with the Biden spending push, is that it ain't going to fix the broken social contract, right? Like a few chip fabs here and there in Arizona, whatever, they're not going to change the nature of American capitalism. And the same thing in Britain, with even shorter horizons, right? It's not going to really fix anything. If anything, it's just going to buy some political time for this government, which is already doing very poorly.
Well, I mean, look, we know it's doing very poorly, because I don't think I've ever seen an approval rating crash so hard. And with spending now set not to grow, like, this is the high watermark of spending, is this budget here.
This is the thing to say, essentially, like, we're not going to put the fire out. What we're going to do is we're going to manage the fire so that a consistent portion of the room is on fire indefinitely.
Pretty much. And look, so we're going to get to the sort of the details of the budget, but I have a few other bits of news to talk about. Number one, I wish to extend a hearty congratulations to Cammy Badok, the Tory MP for Facebook.
Friend of the show.
Winner by default, Cammy Badok, after James cleverly sort of gerrymandered himself out of the race.
Yeah, Yeah, which of course we know the Labour Party response to this is going to be to sort of like very smugly brief that this is a huge win because now the next election is going to be fought on the basis of like reasonable Keir Starmer versus mad Cammy with all of her Facebook bullshit. And in the intervening 4 years, they're just going to give Cammy Badok everything that she wants, which is mostly going to be about making my life worse, which not thrilled about.
It was weird that she mentioned your name.
Yeah. The thing is, well, this is the thing about Cammy Badok is that she, of every politician involved, is most likely to have seen one of my tweets because this is a terminally online woman. This is a thing we will get back to about like the US election next show we do, but like this is a poster. This is a poster's poster.
Cammy Badok has the International Space Station tweet printed out in like 8-bit pixel art on her wall, and she throws darts at it every day.
Yeah.
Because she wants to defend the International Space Station. It was very expensive.
But the other thing is, as you say, November, right? Yes, the Labour Party is going to spend the next 4 years giving this like raving lunatic culture warrior everything she wants.
Yeah, I mean, not just because they're cowards. That's a big part of it, but it's also because it's all stuff that they want to be doing by and large.
But also, they're going to be giving voters, as like Dom was alluding to, nothing.
Of course.
They're going to be giving voters a budget that feels like big spending compared to the last 12 years, but that feels like austerity compared to what you actually need.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was kind of like going to tie this all together later, but I may as well say the thing now. The thing that strikes me about this is the politics that you're setting yourself out to do there are very much like, and, you know, time will tell how well this is working, but like, certainly you can judge the level of affection for it. Will Stansel on Twitter, right, going, well, yeah, you might feel alienated and you might feel shit and you might not be able to like heat your house or buy food, but look at this graph. The graph is going up, and that means don't fucking worry about it. And to then do that in this country where things are in some ways, you know, considerably like less pleasant on a lot of levels, you know, whenever they find whoever the fucking British equivalent of Will Stansel is, which is a horrifying prospect.
We know who that is already.
Do we?
We absolutely know that that's Torsten Bell.
Oh, testicular Torsten Bell.
Yes.
Yeah,
How has he got two cock and ball related puns right there in one name?
But yeah, so I look forward to the next election where it's going to be like, you know, we're going to fucking nail me into a barrel and throw me down Cheddar Gorge. But also, you know, the economy's fine. Don't worry about it. Everything's fine.
All the parties are going to be running on a two-plank platform. Number one, November of the barrel down the gorge. Number two, we're going to look at this hospital that was 30% rebuilt, and we're going to say, well, we fixed the staffing levels for 2024 and 2024 only. We rebuilt 30% of the hospital. Wait times are down from 4 years to 3.5. What are you complaining about?
It's like the way this government's decided to fund the NHS in this budget particularly is interesting to me because it's a little bit like asking for money from your parents to be like, well, you know, we'll let you run a health service this one more year, but like after that, you're on your own.
Yeah. Before we get to that, because that's all jumping ahead a bit, I think it's worth saying as well that like Badok is a conservative leader who brings the party closest to what its most Facebook people believe, which is that the state is big because of identity politics, basically, right? There's a giant state because it's giving out participation trophies. And there's this Gramscian belief that she has and the Facebook people have that like, if you just crush identity politics, then you will crush a huge amount of the state and then entrepreneurship will be able to flourish.
Which is really funny.
Yeah. So she said she has a plan to reprogram the British state and reboot the British economy, to consider every aspect of what the state does, to look at the international agreements, the Human Rights Act, the Equality Act, judicial review, the Treasury, the Bank of England, devolution and quangos, the civil service and the health service. And all of the right-wing papers are lining up to say that this plan, which is exactly the same as every conservative leader for the last, 14 years.
It's what Liz Truss wanted to do, most notably.
Yeah. They're saying, finally, someone with a plan to reboot the UK economy. So like the idea that the Tories have discredited themselves as the party of like economic competence or whatever, that is, gone. That was what, like 3.5 weeks.
Yeah, but at least Labour used that honeymoon period to a lot of effect. You remember all those big policy announcements like,
raising tuition fees.
Yeah, like that.
Yeah,
really like popular stuff. You get it out of the way now, so you don't have the fight about it later.
Or do you remember when they said that they nationalized the railways? Like, they only said it, they didn't do it, but they did say it.
Yeah, well, they nationalized the ticket buying portal, basically.
Yeah, pretty cool.
Yeah, again, you say that, and then Torsten Bell comes in like the fan man, being like
slowly twisting downwards.
Yeah. I think it's also worth noting before we get to the budget that, of course, that knowing what we know about Morgan McSweeney, the brains behind the Starmer operation, is that he is going to be obsessed with catering to either like Badenockian madness. And by the way, the other thing to mention is that just like never Trump republicanism in the States, One Nation Toryism was always a columnist fantasy. It has never existed. It is dead and buried. It is gone.
What if we just had the one decent Tory out there?
Yeah.
One of the less weird British columnist fantasies, to be fair. And I mean, and that's no credit to One Nation Toryism. I'm just like, do you remember when Giles Corran wanted to burn that 12-year-old boy to death?
It's just one nation conservatism can only exist retrospectively. Like Theresa May, for instance, staunch, reasonable Tory.
Yeah, exactly.
What I'm talking about, right, as well. We know Morgan McSweeney, the brains behind the Starmer operation. He's going to be obsessed with catering to these people, whether it's, Badenoch or whether it is like reform that's already being like, hey, we want FBI crime statistics here so we can like win arguments on forums. All of that, they're now competing with who's going to be the true right winger. And we know that the Starmer organization is going to be catering to them. And how do we know that? Is because I couldn't believe it when I read it. I could believe it, but I was shocked at the fact that they called it the same thing, that they're having Small Boats Week, which Rishi had and Boris had and Liz Truss would have had if she was in office long enough.
It's just it was the same then as it is now. It's the sign of a government that is desperately out of ideas, right? And it's just like, well, what if we bang the big racism drum? What about that?
At least Rishi Sunak lasted longer before he declared Small Boats Week. I swear to God.
It's quite Discovery Channel, isn't it? Small Boats Week.
Yeah,
there's a bunch of like weirder content on Small Boats Week.
And much like the Discovery Channel, it's a lot of reruns.
Special episode of Mythbusters.
So he, for example, he's saying, we're going to fund the Border Security Command, right?
Right.
We're going to have more high-tech surveillance equipment. We're going to stop the people smuggling gangs. And he says this, of course, in a joint press conference with Giorgia Meloni, I believe in Hungary.
It's so cool that they're just friends now,
Yeah. Saying, we are going to beat the gangs that are causing people to come here outside of official channels when official channels still don't exist. We are finally going to make it so no one gets into Britain, and then the right-wing papers have to like us. Reform will voluntarily disband if Small Boats Week works, I guess.
Yeah, I'm amazed by how out of touch I am with like the latest generation of misfits in the Conservative Party and their attended media outlets, which I attribute to just muting half of the Twitter universe. I didn't know that Badenoch was that terminally online. Just from reading her public statements, I had an idea that she was somewhat deranged and that she was trying to beat this drum of, equity and diversity hiring is the reason the state is so large. And if we just clamp down on that, then suddenly we'll become some sort of Singapore type economy. But yeah, I have nothing left to say about the Conservative Party in general, to be honest, which is alarming because I think that they're still the most successful democratic, like mass political party of all time, really. And given how poorly the current government is doing, they're probably going to be back in a few years. So yeah, no, I'm quite alarmed by how out of touch I am with those little freaks.
This is a sign of like good mental health, to be fair. Like the fact that I know that Cammy Badok, when she was a student politician, was trying to hack Harriet Harman's email, or like was in group chats with some alarmingly spicy things, and was then getting sort of referred to being like, oh, you don't need to flag anything up to Cammy because she reads everything because she's super online. Right. That reflects poorly on me. How
do you know that though, that she was hacking into her?
Because she admitted it, as far as I remember. Like it made a bit of news at the time, but like it wasn't the career ender that it probably should have been.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we think about the Conservative Party being so electorally successful, we do have to bear in mind the environment. I mean, they're kind of like the Conservative Party are kind of like if you let Millwall play in the under-15s, like It's not that they're good at football per se, but the opposition don't stand a chance.
Well, let's see how well the under-15s defend the title.
Yeah.
I do want to jump over the Atlantic for one moment before we go into the budget. And this is the lens that I want to view the American election through.
The sole lens, right?
Yeah.
Like, just to be clear, the election will still not have happened by the time this comes out, right?
Yes, this will come out the same day as the election. As people are
Getting
Pokemon going...
some tense listeners. Congratulations. I hope you're enjoying your self-care. Try not to think about it. We are going to talk about it one little bit, I guess.
Don't forget to get out and vote for Gary Johnson.
Yeah. Fortnight to the polls.
Why don't you walk to the polls and vote on that thing?
Yeah,
That's exactly right. But the lens I want to view this through, of course, is my favorite story to come out of this whole thing is the Trump whale.
Yes.
I'm a whale. Okay, I live in the sea. People are saying it's too wet. I'm supposed to be wet, okay? I'm actually a mammal. People say I'm a fish. It's not true.
They had Trump played by Brendan Fraser in that one. It was kind of a comeback.
Yeah.
It was,
Yeah.
So the Trump whale is a man who bet more than $30 million on a Trump victory on like various online betting markets such as Kalshi and Polymarket.
I mean, briefly, right, before we get into this, the whole existence of these betting markets and like people on the right and, around the Trump campaign and Trump supporters suggesting that they're sort of like meaningful is really funny in itself, whether or not Trump wins, right? I mean, I think more funny if he loses, but this idea that all of these people have like hyped themselves up into the idea that this is going to be like some Trump landslide because they are betting to drive the odds up in his favor, and so is this one guy, to the point that he's like 67% or something on like betting markets, to which it doesn't reflect anything except their confidence, which means nothing.
What it reflects specifically is that he has captured the degenerate gambler.
Yeah, he was captured the rube market, which is not news about Donald Trump, I will say. And if I wanted to be bullish about this, and I wanted to risk jinxing things, I would look at how much Kamala is down on any one of these things and be like, hey, they're selling dollars for 33 cents or whatever.
Yeah. Well, so Kalshi and Polymarket are two betting platforms that allow you to bet on any outcome via crypto. Kalshi is my favorite one because it's the best business idea in history. They just advertised during Trump rallies.
Yeah, you too can make his numbers go up.
Yeah.
They're also advertising on the Adam Friedland show, aka formerly Cumtown, which I don't know what that says.
So what we're talking about, right, is this one French guy who has bet so much money on a Trump victory, but I don't think he himself is at all partisan. He's just
it's funny whether he is or he isn't, but he has bet like so much that he's been a big part of like moving the market within these like betting markets, right?
Which hilariously appears to have like adjusted pollsters' expectations of what certain states will like. It's gone into adjusting polling errors, which I think is hilarious. That like this one French guy has like scared like Nate Silver so much that he's like caused like a non-trivial amount of poll hurting. So is this guy who says, Theo, who was interviewed by the Wall Street Journal, says, my intent is just making money. He's self-described as a Frenchman who previously lived in the US and worked as a trader for banks. Theo's huge wagers on Polymarket, which is not open to Americans, drew broad attention last month after the Journal reported 4 accounts of the platform have been systematically purchasing wagers on a Trump victory. It turns out that he controls all of them. Speaking English with a slight accent, he said he made his bets after concluding that the polls were systematically underestimating Trump's support.
But by the way, the article that initially like identified this guy, as this whale, did also note that all 4 of these accounts had been like posting in the forums associated with these betting things in sort of like broken English, really like questionably coherent political rants, and it's like,
so cool.
Okay,
I love Donald Trump. In France, we consider him very normal. This is how a man is supposed to be. My father was much like this.
L'homme orange dans la Maison Blanche.
Le Cheeto dans la Maison Blanche.
Zut alors, le Cheeto.
That's like a resist French guy. What we want is like sort of like Trump French guy. He would be like, like anti-woke. you know?
Le wokisme.
Yeah.
Oui.
Le wokisme, c'est très fort.
Faire America génial encore une fois.
J'y dévance. Je l'aime.
Yeah.
J'y dévance, n'est-ce pas fait du sexe avec le couch, le sofa. Like, this guy bets $30 million because he thinks like Trump's support is being systematically undercounted, puts himself into such a position that he can no longer unwind that bet because he's the whole market. So he can't start selling or the value of it will crash. Imagine what must have been going through his head when he saw Kill Tony get up on stage and just start like bombing at Madison Square Garden.
Ah non, sacre bleu, tu es étonné. Oh,
Mon argent.
oh popo. C'est Algérien encore une fois.
Tony Hinchcliffe has lost me $30 million, eh?
Hinchcliffe.
Tony Hinchcliffe.
Antoine Hinchcliffe, non.
Yeah. Or like when he read that it's like, oh shit, they accidentally outsourced all of the ground game to Elon Musk and Scott Pressler, and it looks like their like October surprise / November Hail Mary is to do with
That's
like
not my name.
Peanut the squirrel.
Yeah, I this is the thing, right? Even if Trump wins, this will have been more uncomfortable than I would want to be to make $60 million, you know?
Yeah. The French guy he says, I admit feeling nervous, but a surprise can always occur. Perhaps l'écuelle l'archide may turn around the polls.
I love how you default to a Quebec accent as well. It's really good.
I can do no other. I'm stuck on a Quebec accent.
Tabernacles and money I bet on Kamala Harris is lost.
From
They did not Pokemon go to the polls, huh?
Yeah. This is very amusing, though. This is the guy, right? Who's just like, well, I suppose it's just we have shy, just like, you know, it's, oh, I suppose we have the shy Tory, the shy Trump voter. We're going to systematically undercount them. I'm going to put all of my liquid cash. He said this is 80 to 90% of his liquid assets are now tied up betting on the Trump campaign.
I see. Listen, right? Because of the obvious reasons I was going to experience Schadenfreude if Trump lost, right? But like now, there's a whole little extra, you know, a little extra savor to it, knowing that it has also immiserated one French bond trader.
Or, you know, if it goes the other way, then you know, we're all going to Paris to say désolé to Theo.
If it goes the other way, we all work for that guy, as does everyone else on Earth. Like Nate Silver is going to have to like disembowel himself and throw himself down a step pyramid.
Ah, naissance d'argent.
Wait, Nate Gold? No, yeah, Nate Silver. Sorry. I mixed up my French.
He's going to be Nate Bronze after this shit.
That's right.
Can I just ask, were you guys talking about the election, or was that the newest Thomas Pynchon novel, like a heavy-handed Pynchon novel? Maybe a later Steingart novel, because it's... I mean,
Ooh, yeah, absolutely. I wasn't expecting a Gary Steingart reference today. Fantastic.
Everyone's copy of Infinite Jest, it turned out, just had 2 pages stuck together where they talk about the Frenchman whose life was destroyed by Peanut, l'archide l'écruelle de seulement fans. Peanut the only fan squirrel being like their last big push to the nation.
I don't know what any of these words mean.
Yeah, yes you do, I'm afraid.
Yes, I do, but I like to pretend that I don't sometimes. This performance of weariness is my kind of like escape capsule, you know?
Dom is able to look at all of this and say, wow, that's a Pynchon novel, because he's removed enough from it that he understands it all together. We're looking at all of it one at a time and being like, yeah, it's really stupid that Theo the Frenchman bet $30 million on a campaign that hinged on Peanut the squirrel. Like every step of that makes sense to like us and most of the people listening to this.
Communing with a higher intelligence, you know?
Yeah, well, lower as the case may be.
Conversation between 2 guys at the tennis academy.
Yeah. Dom doesn't process that one thing after the other. He sees it all at once.
That's what I mean, yeah.
What the fuck is going on?
Yeah, but I think we both end up wiping the vomit from our mouths. So I think, in the end, it's the same thing.
This to say nothing of how it will go tomorrow, but it is certainly amusing to think of Theo finding out slowly more and more things about the Trump campaign and
just
saying to himself
on
quietly,
Trump he's never like seen before, you know, and looking. Imagine betting heavily on Trump and then seeing a photo of him for the first time.
Yeah.
But
zut alors.
Yeah, on paper, however it goes, right? I hope that Kamala wins just for like all of the obvious reasons, but also for my newfound Schadenfreude, and I think this is not a moment where we can or should be brunching, but if America does decide to vibe like that, I think a lot of people will be. A lot of people will be, sort of like it will be white women summer. Is it summer? No, it's not summer. It's almost winter. So
yeah, it's pumpkin spice season.
White woman autumn, one of white women's favorite times of year.
It takes a woman of color to finally make it white woman season.
Well, I mean, this is the thing. If she does win, and this will really add some more to it, Hillary Clinton will be the only person on earth to lose an election to Donald Trump.
Oh.
It makes the happy birthday to this future president tweet even funnier. There's no ceiling on this.
The last thing, right, is like, again, like imagine you're Theo, and then you're like, oh, the Trump campaign has lost Martin Shkreli because Trump Jr. rug pulled him. Like,
well, this is the thing, right? Different economies, right? Like the UK doesn't have a Martin Shkreli, right? We don't have those kind of figures. We don't have those kind of characters. We're spiritually deprived in that way, right?
Like our closest thing is what? Like Michelle Mone, basically.
Well, yeah, sure, but like she did the scams.
Matt Hancock's pub landlord.
Yeah, but neither of those people disrespected the Wu-Tang Clan, right? And whereas Martin Shkreli did disrespect the Wu-Tang Clan, and that's an essential part of his like arc.
Yeah, you don't know if Michelle Mone disrespected the Wu-Tang Clan or not. All you know is that you don't know that she did.
It's like, very funny to imagine someone betting on British politics in this way. Like, oh no, Cammy Badok has lost his support of Michael Barrymore. I do not know what this means for the state of the polls.
I can't believe Michelle Mone rug pulled you, God. Look, I want to talk about the budget.
No, I won't let you.
Right. I want to talk about the budget. We need to stop sort of trying to like figure out from just guessing what Dom's Manchurian candidate activation phrase is. Look, we got to talk about the budget. All right. So what we're talking about at a broad level is we are talking about trying to use a combination of accounting trickery, which we've talked about on previous episodes, right? Like unlocking more borrowing for investment. But again, unlocking as though the accounting trickery is real. It's just participating within the logic of like the crazy rules that we've set for ourselves, altering one of them.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, raising a bunch of taxes to cover increases in day-to-day spending. The taxes raised are employers' national insurance, as well as capital gains and inheritance taxes being raised slightly, with, of course, the funniest raise coming from the daisy cutter dropped on the Royal Agricultural College in Cirencester. The minimum wage is rising by 6% from when it was last brought up, which is, of course, considering all the inflation that has happened since then, still a real terms cut. And then some like tweaking syntaxes. Vapes taxed up, of course, because this government is hates
fun
vapors.
Allowed.
Yeah. Draft beer taxes down by 1p, fuel duty frozen, the bus fare cap raised.
The bus fare thing is bad enough, but like the pandering with the a penny off on pints thing was really like every budget is like an insult to our collective intelligence, but that was really like you think me stupid.
Wait, it must be the 5th of November because we're talking about a penny for the guys. Am I right?
All right. Well, I have a laurel crown I'm having delivered to Milo's house.
Thank you.
We are going to be bringing him through the roundabouts of Essex on a chariot with a laurel crown being held over his head and a local tradesman saying, "Remember, you are mortal."
Yeah, I've got 1p off this, Stella, and I'm putting it on Kamala Harris to win. Yeah, only because it's going to piss off this Frenchman.
Just a short comment on this accounting trickery that you mentioned. The context is Britain is a low investment economy. It's a low productivity economy. And it's when I say low investment, that's what we call fixed capital formation, right? It's particularly public and particularly net public fixed capital formation. So basically investment into public infrastructure, right?
We don't build things. We don't build hospitals.
It's almost as if looking around, you might get the sense that this is a country maintained on the cheap.
Yeah. And it's maintained, like everything is the attendant infrastructure of like finance capital, and everything around it is like shitty, low productivity quality service jobs, and nothing else really matters, and has been sold off or has been left in a state of disrepair, or to the extent that it has been sold off, we then come back to bail out these new private operators of previously public infrastructures, when all they did is to saddle these companies with debts. But nothing really gets done in the meanwhile, and it's not been quite as bad as Italy or Germany in terms of the public investment trend over the last decade. But those economies, even Italy, are in some ways more functional than the UK. Don't forget that out of the 10 poorest regions in Western Europe, 9 of them are in Britain, and that's partly due to this squeeze on public spending over the last decades. So anyway, on top of that, there have been these fiscal targets, right? And what they have in common with the European ones, that they have until recently had as their targets the stock of public debt relative to GDP over a given time horizon, right? So it's in this country was 5 years from now, our debt levels relative to income will be X, given our current growth path, and therefore, because we want to meet a certain target, we can only spend this much now. It's a stock measure that informs the current flow measures, if you like, the deficits. What she's done, what Reeves has done, is just replace that stock measure with a different stock measure, basically. So this is what's called public sector net financial liabilities.
The pasnuffle, as columnists have taken to calling it very cutely, because they are some of the most insufferable people around. That
tracks completely. But it is all pretty dumb. So if this adds to mocking this whole thing, then I do support it. But the point is that it's helpful to think about things in a balance sheet with the balance sheet heuristic in mind. So everything has an asset side and a liability side. Households, firms, and governments. Although governments, external public balance sheets work a bit differently, I would say, because you're kind of also responsible for the value of your own assets in a way that households and firms aren't. But what this means, by acquiring new financial assets, by counting certain things as assets, you suddenly free up space on the liability side. So you can take on new borrowing. And that's what I think has been done here on a reasonably large scale. So there is quite a bit more investment in the aggregates. And that's in combination with what you just outlined, Riley, these new taxes. It's certainly much better than nothing. But if we go into detail, which we might do with the NHS, for instance, you see it's so far removed from what we need that it's just going to feel like austerity, even though there is a decent increase over the next few years. So there's one study recently that estimated, there's several studies, but they all agree that the investment needs of the NHS are something in the over £100 billion over the next years. From what I understand in this case, that the day-to-day spending will increase by just over 20 billion for the health budget. And a lot of that is just going to fund current staffing levels, right?
Yeah. In fact, I have the specific numbers in front of me, which is that the additional money for the NHS is 22.6 billion over this year and next, which is the biggest, which she claims is the biggest spending increase for the health service since 2010, if you take out COVID. But so much of that just funds current staffing levels. There's no sense of trying to make things better, trying to make things faster.
Well, you have to go to the private sector for that, right?
It's that it's not to make things better or not to make things faster. In every case where this government wants to spend money, they're going to spend not enough, or what they're going to do is they're going to spend enough to be swallowed up by and alleviate the problem for 1 year. But if you look at their projections of what they intend to spend over the next 5 years, it drastically drops off. Much of the spending is front loaded, and then you're going to be 3 years into Cammy Badok just saying whatever she sees on Facebook, which people are going to consider fun. And then they're going to be like, oh, what's Keir Starmer done? Well, I guess the waiting times are back what they were when the NHS was just in a tailspin rather than a death spiral. I still have a broken leg and I can't be seen for 20 hours rather than 24.
Cammy Badok eviscerating Keir Starmer by saying, but do you remember when the bin men were hard?
Well, indeed. I'd say the analysis from the King's Fund is most devastating, which says the investment will bring some benefit from extra appointments to upgrades to a small number of very outdated NHS facilities.
Yeah, you won't have to get a guy firing x-rays at you with some kind of 19th century beam,
Yeah, the hospitals where patients above a certain BMI can only be treated on the ground floor because otherwise they'll fall through first floor operating theaters. Those are going to mostly be fixed.
Rack concrete is fat phobic.
I do believe that until very recently, and this may still be ongoing, 1940s vintage anesthesia carts were still in use in hospitals. So
great, that is perfect, right? But that's an example, right, where there is this huge amount of money being spent that only looks like it's big because there was nothing before. And when it measures up to the scale of what's needed to have a functioning public service, it is not there.
It's like there is a sort of like 9-inch long knife that's been embedded in the NHS's back, right? And what Rachel Reeves has gone is essentially said, well, we've pulled out this knife 3 inches, which is more than the last government did.
Yeah, the last government pushed it in slightly. We've removed it. We at the new Labour government, we have stitched up 80% of your wound. You know, do you really need your
getting like a part finance hip replacement on the NHS?
Yeah.
If you wanted to bend, you've got to go and speak to our partner here in the private sector.
Sorry, being able to bend at the hip is downloadable content, I'm afraid.
Yeah. I've got my new hip on 25% APR from the dealership.
Yeah.
Getting sticker shock from my hip.
The moment you walk off the lot, the hip value goes down by 50%. Just get a used one.
Yeah, Riley, what you said, it reminded me of something Walter Benjamin said about Weimar Germany as stabilized misery, basically.
Yes.
So it just sort of held things in place for a while. But as we know, Weimar turned out perfectly well.
I was going to say, remind me what happened after Weimar Germany, because it's all good stuff,
exactly.
right?
Yeah, of course.
But it's what you were describing is this is the Stancil Torsten Bell principle, right? This is the baseline effect. You can draw a chart that, if you choose the baseline correctly, is going up, but then you have to rebase it to the beginning of like this whole hollowing out of public services, and then it would just way well below any level of.
You can get way more NHS care than like an early hominid, you know?
Yeah.
Piltdown man was getting
true.
fuck all in the way of hip replacements, so you should be grateful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You think they had MRI machines down in that bog? No way.
The MRI
heavy,
machine
it'd
was
sink.
the bog. That was the best diagnostic thing they had. Get the bog.
Yeah, that's right.
You know?
Yeah.
I'm also quite hung up on a 1930s Frenchman betting on Stresemann to win the 1933 election. I've put my entire reserve of francs into this. I really believe that his introduction of the Rentenmark will prevent
He's alarmingly bald head.
Although he is Zutalor, he appears to have killed a popular vaudeville squirrel. A squirrel from an erotic cabaret.
I like that kind of American newsreader speaking French voice he did there. Zutalor.
Zutalor, the Chancellor of Weimar Germany, appears to have presided over a regime that caused the death of a popular erotic vaudeville squirrel.
Le homme orange dans la maison blanche.
Il s'appelle le gambling sur le Donald Trump.
So, we talk about Weimar Germany as you say, Dom, stabilized misery. And I think that's the perfect comparison here. You know, when we want to compare like the Inflation Reduction Act and chips, and I've long been talking about this, right? Which is that the thing about chips and the Inflation Reduction Act is that it is the product of a country that has the global reserve currency behind it.
Well, yeah. I mean, also, the other thing about this is to do the Stancil thing, you have to at least give Biden credit that he went to the things. He went to the brewery and said, "Ooh, Earth Rider, thanks for the Great Lakes." He put his like name and signature on all the projects that it funded. Whereas we're not going to do that here, right? There's not going to be a portrait of Starmer next to the bog the NHS radiologist throws you into to see what that lump is, right? And so we're going to do all of this stuff in a, like, not only are we doing it worse, but we're not even marketing it as well.
Well, I think that comes down to the different ways that like the American left wing of Capital Party rescues neoliberalism versus the way the UK left wing of Capital Party rescues neoliberalism, and the way that they involve the private sector. Because the chips and IRA, that's in many ways huge giveaways to the private sector, but that are quite direct and that also involve just a massive expansion of state capacity. What the place where it's most similar, weirdly, I think is actually in American building of a bunch of data centers versus like creating power infrastructure or versus just like pumping money into like a securocrat tech economy, building chip fabs and so on. Where like in Britain, what we're essentially trying to do is build stuff that will be a little bit ours, but that mostly is we're mostly trying to crowd in private investment into stuff that will be like half state owned.
I just, as much as I talked about insulting people's intelligence, right? This is a country whose population are begging to be pandered to. And to be honest, like even the insane Facebook shit still isn't really doing as much as it might, you know? Like Huey Long could be running this country by like brunch if he started this evening.
But I honestly think, right, like that the way that we intend to do this is to fix the health system, for example, by funding about 20% of what it needs, maybe about 1% of what it needs for capital upgrades, and then kind of throwing open the door to private industry to come in and develop even closer relationships with these like state functions and then rent seek from them.
Portrait of Richard Branson next to the box.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that's essentially what we want to do is we want to build 1/10 of the MRI machine in the bog and then put a portrait of Richard Branson up while he like funds the construction of the rest and then, you know, is able to extract huge rents on it basically forever. That's how I see this going.
Let me just take a step back to add to something you were saying earlier, Riley, which is the US, first of all, has the benefit of having the global reserve currency, right? So it can actually spend. And the Weimar comparison is almost unfair to Weimar Germany in the sense that, you know, at the time, you can fault them for doing austerity in 29 after the crash, and that brought up the Nazi vote share, whatever. But at that time, you know, they were still on the gold standard, and this US stewardship of the global monetary system meant, in a way, their hands were tied. They couldn't actually spend very much without risking the inflationary pressures that which really destroyed and radicalized the middle class a few years earlier. So you could argue, well, their hands were tied. There's no such thing for the budget for the current UK Chancellor to worry about, especially because the pound, sterling is not the key currency, but it is a reserve currency, and the Bank of England is a competent central bank in many ways. So they don't have to worry about much. And I think all this thing about the MRI machine in the bog and let's take out the blade by 3 inches. They're not that stupid. Look, I mean, go back and look at what Reeves was saying a few years ago. She was more or less having the same conversation we're having now about the Tories. Like, we need investment. This is bullshit. The NHS needs 100 billion. We can't just always engage in these fiscal fictions wherein we underspend, depress our growth path, and therefore our future debt ratio is higher, and therefore we can't spend now, and therefore we just end up in this vicious circle, whatever. She's very cogent about this. So this is obviously about politics. This is not, it's bad macro or nonsensical macro, like arithmetically nonsensical, but it's downstream of shitty politics. So what are those shitty politics? And we were talking about this, Riley. It's the politics that UK policymakers don't want to be seen as an emerging market, but like by creating the impression that they care about borrowing costs and market reactions to fiscal policy. So how will the borrowing costs on the 10-year gilts change overnight when they announce the budget? They sort of tattoo the letters E and M on their forehead.
E and M, not E and M, to be clear.
Yeah, E and emerging market. Yeah. This is it's amazing because you said that you've elected a Blairite and you've sort of turned the country into Venezuela circa 1996. Basically, yeah. Which is, I mean, on the one hand, that's I think valid, but on the other hand, it's not clear whom they're trying to assuage. Yeah. Like they don't want to come off as spendthrift lefties. So there's a internal political thing, and also maybe worrying about the next election, worrying about their very weak majority as they perceive it. But yields are an issue for the central bank.
So just to go back here, what we're talking about is quotes from after this budget. Just to give some context here, after this budget, the yields on British bonds went up slightly. Traders punished the UK slightly, and this seems as though Starmer and Reeves seized upon this as a kind of thing they have to suddenly apologize to bond traders for.
Yeah, and that's been, but they've been consistent about that being their most important day-to-day policy variable, which is again totally self-defeating. But also the fact that the pound didn't sell off too, that's the sign of an emerging market. Yields go up and your currency depreciates at the same time. That was the case in the Truss Kwarteng budget for totally different reasons that have to do with the vulnerability in the British financial system. But the point is, this is all completely unnecessary. They could have much more borrowing and spending if they can communicate that this is productive investment that also renders your future debt sustainable, which is how you should think about spending. You shouldn't have these dumb made-up fiscal targets. You should think about, is our debt sustainable? How do we measure that? Can we service it sustainably in the future? What is that a function of current levels of productive investment? And that's how you go. You don't invent these targets and then say, we worry about bond yields, and then people punish you for it. I mean, these are fundamentally unserious people, is what I'm trying to say.
If we want to talk about insulting intelligence, bonds. I mean, changing one of those rules to say, oh, we've changed a rule that's going to allow us to magically invest more, which just we all agreed we couldn't do forever. I think that also insults the intelligence of bond traders.
Yeah, you might be doing your bond thing, but I've been talking to all of Nigel Lawson's old stuffed animals that we keep in the Exchequer's office, and we've got all of their permission to do this, so it's like fully vetted.
What bond traders are thinking about generally is also like, well, is this going to be a profitable investment for me? Am I going to be able to keep getting paid back?
Was Quantum of Solace really the best one? Things of this nature, you know?
Yeah, that's right. I think the idea that like they're taking seriously what is essentially a fiscal rule for domestic consumption so that everyone gets to feel very serious.
It's LARPing. This is LARPing. They're all fucking LARPing. This is what it is. I've solved it.
Well, that's essentially what I was going to say with more words in answer to Dom's open question, right? Which is, what are the politics behind such bad macro management?
I hit the deficit with my foam sword, you know?
Yeah.
I am live action role playing in the persona of a serious ironclad commitment to the rules chancellor.
Yeah, and so like the bad politics behind this, I think, are mostly about spite. They're about hating on the people who like they know that they have to hate on to be taken seriously. I mean, we talk about like the labor old right as being different from Blairism because the labor old right takes like groups of people who are insiders and benefits them while whipping people who are outsiders, right? Is that they believe like that they are there to infuriate and crush like students, like unprotected workers, like migrants, people who aren't already insiders. And they also believe that the only way that they're going to be able to do this within the rules of Thatcherism, right? They're trying to be the labor old right within the rules of Thatcherism is to like pander to bond traders for your investment, which means you're never going to be able to invest enough to fix the stuff. Like if you want to know what the politics are behind it, it is simply a sort of spite-driven commitment to never go outside of a political framework that was established in 1980. But to do that with the trappings and traditions of the labor old right, of the Ernest Bevin Labour Party, basically. That's what I think the politics behind this are.
This isn't Ernest Bevin, this is sarcastic Bevin.
Yeah. You know, so by saying like, yeah, NHS, we're going to give you enough money to pull the knife out by 3 inches. That's all that they can do within this realm. And then what they're next going to do is say, okay, well, we fully anticipate that what's going to happen is either private investment will come in and then fill the rest of the gap. And then as that's happening, there'll be so much economic growth that our spending envelope will get bigger, just inherently. And then we'll be able to solve those problems then. So it is what, like 5% less magical thinking than Trussism, maybe, essentially. And, you know, if you want to talk about experiencing this as austerity, not just at the macro level, this being pretty incoherent, but if you want to talk about experiencing this as austerity, you have to look at local government because that's where people most feel cuts to services most acutely because that's where there's a huge amount of statutory obligations and very little statutory funding. Like adult social care, for example, you have to fund that as a local government yourself, legally, statutorily. You have to have council tax set at a certain amount legally, statutorily, and the government is only going to give you certain decreasing amounts, especially as your needs pile up and pile up and pile up.
Yeah, well, the government is motivating local authorities by doing that sort of thing, you know, like some parents do where they start charging their kids rent at 16. They're like, well, they're going to just have to figure it out. You know, we had to figure it out. You're going to pull your socks up, Birmingham.
Look, every government started as a local authority.
Yeah. I've had enough of Hampshire lying in bed till noon.
Look, when I was a young local authority, a mere northern French duchy, I was ambitious. So this is 1.3 billion goes to local government. And that is, again, not enough because local authorities are going to be in deficit by not even how much they need to let alone running a growing needs for service. They're going to be in deficit by 9.3 billion by 2026. So again, 1.3 billion is pulling a 9-inch blade out 1 inch.
Yeah, and it's profoundly, I mean, as you said, Ronnie, it's people will feel that much harder than any setback at the central government level because a lot of the social services are at the local level. And there are really only two options there. Either you will preside over a lot of council bankruptcies and consolidations, which often mean more cuts to local services, or you raise council taxes, which are profoundly regressive forms of taxation, right? Mm-hmm. And which aren't officially taxes, so you can actually change them much more easily. It's also this, it's terrible unsustainable economically and socially, but it's also suicidally political.
Yeah. So, for example, Hampshire, Milo, you mentioned Hampshire. One of the richest local authorities in terms of like the people that live there in the country doesn't have any youth centers left. Libraries and bus services have been squeezed. Highway maintenance is being cut. Street lighting is being rationed. And people who like school crossing guards are going to be like weaned out, right? This is a conservative-led council that should have been like at least the poster child of like the previous governments. And yet even still, it is fighting a death rattle against insolvency.
Well, look, kids are going to have to figure out the road by themselves. No one helped us cross the road. And, you know, with no street lights, they'll be less vulnerable to the Luftwaffe.
What if, through a process of natural selection, all children in Hampshire are extremely alert to cars?
Yeah, or we made them just immune to cars. Like we developed the children in Hampshire into that guy the Australian Road Safety Commission made a mock-up of who could survive any car accident, you know? They all just have like no neck and a big like kind of trapezoid head.
And so, like, if you're a voter, you're going to spend the next 5 years hearing about all of this spending that's happening.
And then not seeing any of it. But, well, in fact, not seeing it so much because there's no street lighting anymore.
Yeah. And the bits of it that you're seeing are keeping services largely at the level that they're at now, which is considered to be pretty fucking horrible, as opposed to getting even worse. But what you are going to see is stuff like libraries get worse. No highways are going to be maintained. Cultural and community spaces are going to close. The street lights won't be on. Road gridding will cease. So that's what you're going to notice on a day-to-day basis. The plan seems to just hope that like Cammy Badok or Nigel Farage cannot then turn to all of that and drum up kind of desperate support for a much crueler option of how to deal with it. You know, too little, too late in the wrong areas seems to be too little, too late in the wrong areas. And mostly we're spending our time talking to bond traders who don't really care. We are 1996 Venezuela.
Because they're busy thinking about Skyfall.
Yeah, that's right.
This is the insane thing. The bond traders do care. And there is a huge coalition that includes people even in the financial sector who want more spending. This is the insane thing. This is a Labour government who's to the right of much of the most virulent capitalists on what an appropriately sized budget would be.
Yeah. Once again, woke bond traders to the left of the UK government. It is, I mean, this is what we talk about Habsburg AI, right? And like what happens when you keep feeding a system on the products of itself. And I think UK politics.
Wait. You have to, you talk about Habsburg AI. Can you elaborate?
Oh, sorry.
It's like a computer that's full of water and it's got one shriveled black testicle.
Yeah, feeding an AI on itself until its hallucinations sort of multiply. It's essentially like a prion disease, but for like
mad cow
language.
GPT.
Yes, essentially.
Very good. Yeah.
And I like to think about what happens when closed systems are too self-referential for too long. And on this show, we have come at the UK as a closed system that feeds on itself from a lot of different angles, whether we're talking about its incredibly good at defending its elites and keeping them from like recirculating and keeping new elites from entering.
Yeah, like another country would have replaced Prince Andrew with another better prince.
Yeah. Or how like we are sort of our institutions are incredibly insular, the very, very close connections between the press, Downing Street, and think tanks. You can approach it from any angle, but ultimately why this is the only country, I think, where like bond vigilantes tend to be to the left of the government because we don't take in new information. At the risk of sounding like a sort of prediction markets person, the priors never get updated. We never break out of as we alluded to earlier, the things that make us feel the fiscal rules are necessary. Everyone's talking to Nigel Lawson's stuffed toys because everyone believes that is the most important ritual for power. It is so much of the government of this country is so ritualistic that there is nobody who seems to be able to or willing to deliver any kind of remedy that is within anything close to the scope of the problem. You know, and again, we're comparing this not to America the progressive, right? This is because Americans also, make no mistake, that a lot of them are feeling the sort of post-Inflation Reduction Act/CHIPS Act world as Austerian also.
Yeah, it might be about to lose Kamala the election, right?
It's driven by like very wealthy people getting much wealthier, spending quite a bit more, and with the very largest companies, especially those that profit directly from government contracts, getting incredibly outsized profits. This is very like a brittle way to manage the economy, and it looks good, as you were alluding to earlier, Dom, at the top level, but it's also felt like austerity by everyone below, right? right?
Yeah, but I'm sympathetic to this notion of there's a closed system that's feeding on itself. But spend any amount of time in Germany or in Brussels, and it's far more insular and stupid at the level of like fiscal policy and social policy. It's the exact same thing, but even more stupid in a way, because they have fewer limitations than the UK does. But it is curious, though, that the UK is an insular system, but it's uniquely open to the global economy at the same time. So the institutions don't update, but the process of institutionalized capital cannibalizing the country, it goes on unimpeded. And it's actually one thing that I forgot to mention about, or to add to your rundown of the budget. This whole thing about increasing carried interest rates, for instance, where capital gains tax effectively, it's a complete non-starter, because nothing is actually changing about the way this actually happens on the ground. So in private equity firms or in these large asset manager firms, because what happens is that they don't really put in their own money, the partners, or they will simply do so at sort of a ceremonial level. They'll put in like £100 or something, and the pool part of the partners' contributions add up to a few £1,000s, and that's what they end up paying the 30% on. But of course, they make outsized gains, either asset stripping or establishing permanent claims to productive means in this country. And that's the thing that no one ever talks about. And in that sense, it is incredibly insular, our political discourse. But then I also think the same thing happens in every other damn country.
The UK, at least, is sort of, I say its ratio of elite and institutional insularity to financial openness is probably the most dramatic of any of the other states. We are the most like trying to fire a nuclear torpedo from a sloop ass country.
Yeah. Well, I think in that case, if we don't want to take on new economic ideas, we should start going back to some old economic ideas and see if they work.
Oh no.
I think Keir Starmer should dissolve the monasteries and use the various golden jewels contained therein to, fund a new age of economic development. The problem with Tudorism is sooner or later you run out of other people's monasteries.
well, because true Tudorism has never been tried.
Yeah, that is very true, actually.
It's all been sparkling Yorkshireism.
Yeah.
We've been going a little bit long, but number one, Dom, I want to thank you very much for coming and talking about the budget. And I'm sorry that we kind of derived a Pynchon novel from first principles for you in the first 20 minutes of the show.
I was having the time of my lives. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah.
It was our pleasure.
And of course, you can check out Eurotrash with Dom and David Adler, also lately of this parish, wherever you find podcasts. Also, this is probably the last day to order shirts.
Are they not going off sale like now?
Oh,
when we're
right. Never
recording
mind. Well, you should have bought it earlier.
Yeah. Live show, though. Hey,
yeah.
You could buy a shirt there, a different shirt, but a shirt nonetheless. 24th of November at Between the Bridges. That's a Sunday. Yes. There'll be a ticket link in the description. Also, come and see me. Bath, 15th November, Bristol, 16th November, Southend, 19th, Oxford, 21st, Liverpool, 22nd, Manchester, 23rd, Leeds, 25th, sold out. Sorry. December 14th, Taunton. There you go.
With Taunton, Southend.
There
are others.
That's right, correct. MiloWebber.co.uk.
Okay, all right. So, shirts, probably not on sale anymore, but if they are, they won't be for very long.
No.
And also, there are live show tickets, as Milo mentioned, so do check those out. And of course, there will be a premium episode this week coming out later, so that's $5 a month on Patreon. All right. See you in a few days, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.